Hello, everyone. This is Outcast Trading. I'm your host, Brad, and today is December 17th, 2018. And thank you for joining us. So, what am I smoking? $1,000 an ounce silver? Are you kidding me? Is that even possible? Is that even within the realm of possibility? Well, it is, uh, but is it likely? No, no, it's not. Um, just to back up a little bit, I am a precious metals investor. I've been a precious metals investor, um, you know, since I was a kid. Really, I've collected coins and a little bit of silver, but for the most part, not since 2015 did I start to dabble in it. And I have a little bit of silver, probably not enough to join the truly elite amongst the silver bugs. I understand that guys like David Morgan has a ton of silver. Um, I'm not sure he admits to the full amount, but I know that guy is sitting on some pretty significant amounts. And I know Jim Rogers has been a big buyer of gold, but I think he's also eyed silver as well, just because the precious metal has been beat up so significantly. But every once in a while, you'll come across a YouTube video or you'll come across a thesis that, claims $1,000 an ounce silver or $10,000 an ounce silver. And while it's possible, it's not very realistic. Just put it in perspective, currently the price of silver sits at $14.63 an ounce. And so to move to $1,000 an ounce, that is a jump of 68x or 6,800% of increase. Now, while you could see that in a severe hyperinflationary scenario like what we're seeing in Venezuela, you would have massive global economic upheaval that would have to take place. I mean, it wouldn't just be here in the United States, because other countries, because of our global reserve currency, do have a vested interest in keeping us propped up, even if they hate it, even if they're trying to get out of it. They do have a vested interest in keeping our reserve currency status propped up for the time being until they can move. And so, perhaps in 5 to 10 years, you could see them move off of the global reserve currency. Then we would have to have something like war or a major natural disaster. I know the crazies that look at the Yellowstone super volcano. Maybe that blows and destroys two-thirds of the country. I mean, you would need something where you had uh, basically kind of a shock and awe impact on our economy, such in terms of inflationary increases that it would drive the price of silver, through the roof along with everything else. So, as far as purchasing power relative to everything else goes, that kind of scenario wouldn't necessarily help you because then you would be dependent not necessarily on the flat fiat price of silver, but you'd be pretty much at the mercy of how silver is doing compared to everything else, because at that point, when your currency is worthless, it gets removed from the equation. Then you start looking at, well, how much silver does it take to buy a loaf of bread? Currently at $14.63 an ounce, if you're basing it on roughly, $2 for a cheap loaf of bread, you're somewhere in the neighborhood of around a little over 7 loaves per ounce of silver. Well, what if at $1,000 an ounce, you're only able to buy 3 loaves because everything else is skyrocketed. In fact, maybe a premium gets put on food. So it's possible in an apocalyptic financial sort of scenario, but in terms of, are you going to be wealthy by buying, 10 ounces of silver or 100 ounces of silver? Maybe get your hands on 1,000 ounces of silver. Are you going to be wealthy? Are you going to be well off? Are you going to be a land baron? Mm, Not necessarily. Even if the price of silver increases at a dramatic rate. But what I will say, and why I still do invest in silver and hold on to my silver, is because I think the metal is extraordinarily beat up. I think it's way undervalued. I think we could see a scenario where, the dollar dropping in late 2019 or 2020 could drive, the price of silver 3x, 4x in the next 5 years. So, I mean, that would be a pretty nice rate of return. 400% is a really nice rate of return when you're talking about, $42 an ounce silver to, somewhere in the neighborhood of $64 an ounce silver. So, um, you know, um, there's a lot of, I think, upside to silver, but at the same time, I don't think that this $1,000 an ounce silver scenario is all that realistic. Now that said, there are other considerations, and I understand that there are some pretty interesting and I can't get my head around saying it's a good argument, but it is an interesting argument. So if you go to like debtclock.org, you can see that they will chart the price of silver based on the amount of outstanding currency of M1 money or M2 money out there. They'll do a calculation and say, well, hey, silver really should be at $700 to $800 an ounce. And while I don't disagree with the calculation, um, there's what should be reality, and then there what is truly reality. And sometimes, what makes sense on paper doesn't necessarily translate to the market because the market is based largely upon investor psychology. And you've heard the old adage, a market can stay irrational a lot longer than you can stay solvent. And I think in terms of silver, there has been a long standing tradition of market manipulation and pushing both gold and silver prices down in order to keep both of these strategic metals, particularly silver as a strategic metal, suppressed so that you're able to get it into the hands of innovators in technology and of course innovators in military hardware and things like that. So silver is a pretty important metal because of its properties. It has some characteristics and properties that can't be duplicated in any other metal. And so, being able to, for instance, pass electricity at the rate that it's able to pass electricity through is just really something that, keeps it on the forefront of being a strategic metal. And for that reason, silver has been more valued as an industrial metal than a monetary metal. Now, I don't think that should be the case, but I also have to um, be humble enough to realize the reality. And so in buying silver, while I would love very much for, current prices to remain roughly the same, or, even if current prices doubled and my price of silver, if the silver that I held went up 68x, I mean, obviously that's a cryptocurrency 2017 like move, and I'm pretty happy about that, right? But is that realistic? I I just can't buy it. That said, weird things happen. I mean, crazy things have happened in the market. I mean, you saw the price of silver go from, less than $1 in the early 70s all the way up to $50 with the Hunt brothers when they tried to corner the market. That's a 50x move. So, I mean, hey, maybe that can be duplicated again. Um, Although, if you're looking at more recent history, you had the price of silver go from roughly, somewhere around the $8 range, up to $50 between 2008 and its peak in 2011. So, while that's a great move as well, 6x move, it's not 68 times. So I think people just need to be realistic when they buy the metal. They need to realize that there is a lot of potential for upside, but there's also been a long history of manipulation, a long history of the government and the SEC looking the other way when it comes to that manipulation. And I don't necessarily think that that's going to change without, there being a kind of a populist movement to push for the metal to be freely traded. And so until you get that kind of psychology within, the average consumer, there isn't going to be any pressure on the government to go ahead and investigate these exchanges and to change kind of the status quo. So while I do sit and wait because, I've seen banks like JP Morgan make moves that make me raise eyebrows and go, hey, this is possible. This this is possible to see a nice move in silver. I'm also realistic in terms of what that move could be. While still, acquiescing to the fact that we could see a collapse in our currency, in the next 10 to 15 years. That is possible. I think, the dollar will be replaced as a global reserve currency. I'm not quite buying the Venezuela type hyperinflation in this country at this point, but who knows? I mean, stranger things have happened, and when things look rosy, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have calamity befall you later. I mean, look at the 1920s, for instance. I mean, 1920, 22, 23, up through the mid 20s, everything looked great. It looked like the expansion was never going to stop, and that, with easy credit being first introduced to the American consumer, you saw, goods and services being bought, companies expanding their capex. It looked like, everything was blue skies ahead, and then all of a sudden, 1929 rolled around, and you had this kind of roiling effect that you have now, where the markets churned in the summer of 29, particularly all the way up to October. And then, October 29th hit, and the rest is history, so to speak. So that could happen again, and we could see a lot of inflationary pressures, following a deflation, of course. Silver could go in the other direction too. I mean, just because it's $14 now doesn't mean it can't dip to $12 or $11. Again, it's all dependent upon market psychology, and it's dependent upon, the big movers that are allowed to pretty much freely do what they want in terms of suppressing the price. So until we see a change there, I don't anticipate there being, a ton of movement in silver, at least near term, but I do anticipate a move maybe in the next 18 to 24 months. So again, this is all my opinion. Just so you guys know, if you haven't heard me before, I've been an independent trader for about 20 years, traded various financial instruments. I've worked as a financial analyst, not an advisor, financial analyst. I'm just a number cruncher behind the scenes, so to speak. I worked for a company that offered financial services, pension plans, 401ks, and such like that. But I am not a serious license holder. Just giving my opinion, just talking through, some of my ideas about my own investments and just sharing those here publicly. So not trying to dispense any financial advice, just entertainment purposes only. But thanks again for listening, and I look forward to kind of getting back on track. I deviated from my last two podcasts where I was talking about some of the risks to the market. Should get back on track on Tuesday or later to that end. So again, thanks for listening, guys, and take care.